Today's COVID update is brought to you by Fulltech Systems, your technology center, where you'll come for the price but stay for the service.
And we are back, jumping into our first conversation today. We are talking about the economy today. And we, for our COVID-19 update today, we are going to be joined by Darrell Bradley, the attorney at law, former mayor of Belize City, and the current president of the Senate. Good morning, Darrell.
Good morning, Gavin. It's a pleasure to be here, especially under these circumstances.
Yes, of course, it's a pleasure to have you with us as always. We are talking today about an economic plan for the recovery of the Belizean economy, right? So the first question I guess we can jump right into is how it is that you came about making this sort of a plan.
Well, I think essentially every Belizean is very concerned in relation to the current situation. I think it came about as a result of my conversations with various stakeholders within Belize, including people in the business community. I myself am a business owner, having been the proprietor of a law firm. And as an individual invested in the economy, I'm concerned with how quickly we can rebound as a society so that we can continue to get business on the road, provide jobs and opportunities for individuals. So that it came as a result of my personal experience during the closure, but also my interaction with the person.
Yeah. So you decided to record this particular, what it is just a number of ideas and a look forward as the things we may need to do as a country to kind of get the economy jump-started again. And of course, It has been running as an ad. Have you gotten any reactions to it as yet?
Well, surprisingly, a lot of people have texted me and raised additional ideas. For example, one of the things that I think I didn't address in the communication was really the idea of individual planning. Like, for example, household planning, getting back to the idea of thrift and saving and planning for circumstances which are beyond our control. One of the things that we realized during these circumstances is how few Belizeans, because of their salary, because of certain circumstances, they don't have emergency funds. So one of the things that people have really expressed to me is just the comment that you want to also focus on individual responsibility, that people in your own homes. I know that earlier you were talking about hurricane and you were talking about a tropical storm. One of the things that we're always mindful of is that as individuals, we also need to be prepared.
Yes. Yeah.
And you know,
feedback and positive response in relation to what people want to see happen. One of the things I want to underscore here is that nothing in this plan is really new. It's not novel. And I think when we talk about jumping the economy back, it's really about macro things like inclusion and getting the people who can bring good ideas to the forefront. The idea of investment in particular areas of the economy. None of the things are new. The idea of a living wage, the idea of a land program, the idea of free education, the idea of skills training. But it's really to ensure that as a society, working with their stakeholders, we can come together.
You know, those are great points. But what I want to sort of start the conversation by saying is that I think early on in the video that you released, you said something to the effect that COVID is not necessarily and I'm paraphrasing you, is that not necessarily the cause of a lot of the problems in our society, but rather it's exposing the harsh realities. So I would like to get kind of your assessment of what you mean by the harsh realities, and what is your assessment of the situation, Belize's economic situation as it stands currently?
Yeah, well, one of the things that you would be aware of is, as a small economy, and I've read articles of this, Belize's economic structure, there's a limitation on us responding to shock. When I was at City Council, we feared a lot of threats as a result of hurricanes. Any shock to our economy really can cause widespread collapse. And so we need to plan the economy around that so that it's appropriately diversified and we don't depend on one area. I mean, I suspect that Belize will always be heavily dependent on tourism, but there are things that we can do to diversify our economy to ensure that we have other pillars of the economy that traditionally has been mainstream, including things in terms of the economy, agro-processing. We've always, I've worked with various projects and consulted and advised in relation to energy and energy independence and in terms of novel areas like wind energy and solar panel. So one of the things that I kind of try to focus on is what we need to do in terms of ensuring that our economy can respond to shock events. I mean, the pandemic hit everybody in the world by surprise. Nobody really was expecting it, but our economy is always vulnerable to shocks like a hurricane.
I think one of the things when we look at the impact of COVID, and I really appreciate that you said it really just exposed the realities. It exposed things like the inequity that exists in our society. It exposed, I know a lot of people have questioned the unemployment figures, and we've been able to kind of talk about that with SIB, that our problem isn't so much unemployment, it's underemployment, because if you work 1 hour for the week, you're considered employed, but definitely not making enough to live. So I think when we look at all these issues, they were there before. We've been talking about diversifying the economy. We've been talking about reducing the wage bill. We've been talking about making businesses have more ease of transactions and kind of lightening the load that they were taking. I mean, when we talk about free education, that's been, I think, before my lifetime, that's been a conversation.
Yeah.
So these ideas have all existed before, but now that we're in this crunch and there is a need to, 1, get the economy started, 2, get it to rebound, and 3, get it to grow, which we haven't been able to do for quite a while. How do you assess priorities and what is actually feasible?
Well, I think I would broaden it in 3 categories. First of all, there has to be a focus on addressing this area of inequality that you identified. And I think that this is something that has been pervasive in Belize. So I talk about things like ensuring the access to land. And I think traditionally in Belize, from both political parties, we've never organized a proper land policy to ensure that every Belizean has access to land. And then also in relation to providing a range of options for affordable housing. One of the indicators of entry into the middle class is that a person owns their own house. I've been, in my law firm, inundated by questions from landlords and tenants in relation to how to deal with the situation. Now, people aren't paying their rent. But if people own their own home at this current point, they would have been less vulnerable to evictions and so forth. Then they talk about having a living wage. That's actually a fundamental thing, an idea that has been about globally to ensure that people have a basic calculated wage that allows them to withstand inflation and other threats in the economy. So that there are things that we need to do in relation to ensure people move out of the lower bracket and they go up. There are other things that we need to do in relation to ensuring that there are strategic investments in the economy. I've heard over the last month about major projects that are in the pipeline, and I think that government needs to work quicker to ensure that these projects are really being implemented quickly. The turnaround time for it is too long. I remember when I was at City Hall at the downtown rehabilitation project, I became mayor and I went through the entire 6 years, and monies didn't start to roll until I left City Hall. So it takes too long to unwind the channels of bureaucracy so that these project monies can be invested into the economy. One of the things that I think that needs to be done is a stimulus package. We actually need to identify resources that we can pump into the economy very quickly. And the third thing, very importantly, is that government needs to focus on performance. Gavin can tell you this, there's at any given time a lot of people who want to invest in Belize, but just to get a land title document back from the lands department, to get certain government services, it takes too long, and that's unacceptable. We need to focus on things like making the government more efficient addressing issues of corruption, and really making sure that the government is all about performance. But I think if we can focus on those three areas quickly, including legislation and policy reform, and making the government better coordinated, including out of the office of the Prime Minister, one of the things I propose is that there needs to be a project unit in the office of the Prime Minister so that these strategic projects need to be coordinated from the highest level so that monies can be flow very quickly.
And quickly, that's essentially what we're talking about here, because as we have this conversation, we are looking at thousands, tens of thousands that are unemployed, that are not making any income, that are waiting on, $100, $150 to be given out by government, which will come to an end at some point in time. And we're facing, these families are already in a crisis. I can't imagine not being able to figure out how I'm going to pay my rent or my utility bills, or worse, put food on the table. So it's about urgent actions first. We've been trying to have more conversations about, what could be done, what should be done, what might work. And what we haven't heard as yet is actually a formal plan being put forward by the government in terms of what we're going to do to get us back, or get the economy moving again. We only get tidbits here or there. Now, it's important that we strategize, and I want to ask, because you are the president of the Senate, you're a member of the ruling administration. Is there talk of getting a group of persons together to decide on a plan that will get us through this crisis?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people are coming together both in the government and in the NGO community and among relevant stakeholders. But this is one of the issues that I kind of find is difficult with our political structure. And these are things which we needed to address in the past, but it really becomes a focal point in this pandemic. We really need to ensure that we are able to bring together the brightest minds. And I think we have it in Belize. We have people who are making it work during this pandemic. I have had the opportunity of touring various industry sectors throughout the country, and I was fascinating the level of technology that is actually in our agricultural belt. We're doing amazing things in Belize. It's how do we expand that? So one of the things that I think that can be done immediately is that government needs to identify funding so that we have a stimulus package within Belize immediately. And I'm talking about a significant amount of money. We also need to identify large projects that can bring money into the economy very quickly, and we need to unfold those things through proper coordination so that if it is legislation, if it is policy reform, one of the things also that I think can be done is that you can give certain levels of tax reprieve in relation to businesses that keep their employees. So that I know that England had did this, and we're talking about a situation where government needs money. But I'm saying that you can have a balance. One of the things that I did speak about when I was on Open Your Eyes previously is the elimination of trade license fees. I think that that is something that affects businesses very negatively. And now is a time when you can show a gesture to the business community to encourage investment, say that, okay, we're going to go and we're going to eliminate that, because that's not something that I think directly correlates to any service that members of the public, and that's an area that would give some reprieve to members of the business community. What I'm saying is that the things that can be done relatively quickly to provide funding so that spending can go in the economy while we figure out the remaining parts of it.
And as a sort of general, or let's say an umbrella policy then, in order to enact all of these sort of initiatives, do you envision that we are going to continue sort of operating, and I'm speaking now specifically about an policy in terms of economics, that we're going to continue along sort of a similar system, or let's say a free market sort of more capitalist system, or do you envision it going in a more socialized direction? Because these are conversations that are being had all over the world, and governments are trying to look at innovative situations to create, sort of a societal safety net. So when you're talking about these policies, is it so? For example, would we be looking at a stimulus package to where government is perhaps, creating policies, perhaps even lending money to the private sector in order to stimulate? Yeah. Or are we looking at, the government actually having a stake in these things, subsidizing programs, so that, in order to pay for, some of these programs that you've suggested, such as free education, X, Y, and Z. So sort of what direction or vision do you have for the economic future of the country?
Well, one of the main things I think is the concept of partnership. I think that there has to be a balance so that Belize has always operated on the middle ground. We've never been over the socialists, we've never been over the capitalists. And I think that should be the way that we continue. But there has to be government direct investment in the economy. So for example, we've oftentimes talked about this and it's been put out there, but it's actually been the subject of mismanagement and abuse. But something like having capital accessible to people who are investing particularly in newer small businesses like agricultural businesses. So one of the things that I would say is that things like the Development Finance Corporation needs to be expanded, but it needs to be expanded in a very transparent way so that we can provide capital to people who would invest in the economy and create jobs. We've heard like a lot of the sectors in tourism have been hit. A lot of other businesses have been hit. Government needs to actually specifically talk about ways that we can assist businesses and encourage them to retain as long as possible their employees until such time that the COVID relief is opened up so that the businesses can resume to normalcy. So that the idea of stimulus is something that other countries have done, even countries of comparable size to Belize. So it can't be an answer that we say that we just don't have money. We need to find the money. And even if we would take the money out of the economy, because Belize's economy right now is very liquid. We have a lot of liquidity. We have monies that are saved at bank. Right now, we need money. We can utilize those monies through financial instruments like bonds and so forth, and redirect those monies into investment projects that create jobs. And that's actually something that can be done very quickly. When I was at City Hall, we did the municipal bond. We took an organization that was really in the red for 30 years. And we did a municipal bond that we invested in infrastructure. And as a result of that, there was a resurgence of business activity and hope within the Belize City culture. And that's something that can be done again at the national level. Yeah. You can have financial instruments that draw money out of the economy and reinvest it back in the economy. So businesses and money would circulate relatively quickly.
I hear what you're saying, and I think the stimulus idea is one that we've heard both from the tourism sector and also we've heard it from the private sector through the chamber as well. And there have been some innovative ideas and concerns that we've heard, I think, over the past few weeks. The business sector is even talking about being able to restrict some of the imports that we have of goods that are produced locally. The tourism sector is talking about being able to access capital through IFIs, through international financial institutions, to be able to offer that to the tourism sector so that they would be able to have low interest, long-term loans. So, yeah. And then I hear your ideas as well, but I still go back to the same question. These ideas are kind of being thrown around in different sectors naturally because everybody's just trying to keep their head above the water, but we don't hear anything as to what is going to be implemented. We don't hear anything about what is going to be the vision, because the challenge is, and you'll know, coming from public administration, is that once you start get moving into all these ad hoc plans, you end up just doing, but with no vision and no end goal in mind.
Yeah. So I think that's an important point. I think fundamentally, and one of the things that I addressed with the plan is that government needs to be better coordinated. And we have a society that's very small, so government will always have a dominant role in the conversation. The office of the Prime Minister and Cabinet are very strategically placed in relation to coordinating sectors of the economy. That will never change. But what we need to do is that we need to create a culture where we can bring together ideas. One of the things that I've oftentimes observed in our discussion is how much fighting we have, among political parties, how much fighting we have between government and the unions, between government and the private sector. This is a time that we need unity, and we need the coming together of ideas and bright minds, irrespective of political parties, irrespective of government and private sector, and we need to bring together partnership to implement this relatively quickly. The ideas are there. It just requires the political will and the leadership at the very top to make it work. I mean, many of the things that you have just outlined are things which are very excellent ideas and things which can be done in a relatively short period of time. There are a bulk of IFIs out there which are targeting smaller countries, developing and emerging markets like Belize, and they're prepared to offer funding. But the government then needs to channel that resource and then on lend in the local economy so that people have access, as you said, to these short-term low-interest loans so that they can bounce back as quickly as possible. The idea of partnership and relationships is a fundamental concept, both in getting us out of COVID and in the long-term development economic strategy for Belize. Working with the diaspora community that I mentioned. And one of the things that I think is important to recognize is how much the diaspora contribute to the growth of Belize's economy. I have so many people who live in the United States who are Belizean Americans, Belizean Canadians, Belizeans living abroad, who have expressed interest in investing back in Belize. And that's something that we can channel very, very quickly, working with our international partners, diplomatic missions, working with the private sector. You've heard me talk about eliminating trade license. I think that now is the time for us really to focus on that and seeing how we can alleviate some of the burdens on the business community so that they can then provide the investment in job creation that's needed at this time.
It also requires a high level of innovation. And I've been saying this for quite a while. I think that if we just look globally, everybody's facing the same situation, trying to figure out how to get their economy restarted, how to get people working again, how to get businesses functioning well enough to be able to have employees. And it's going to take brand new ideas, and it's going to take a bit of risk-taking in terms of how you will move forward. And, I'll give you this idea, especially because you're one of our younger politicians. I think sometimes, too, we need to look at bringing in some of our recent graduates or people who are younger to kind of talk about the direction that the country needs to go as well, because what we have done in the past most likely will not be our way forward.
Yeah. I think that it's not the ideas. For example, one of the major pillars of the Belizean economy, which I think could be a mainstay. You look at certain countries like Taiwan and South Korea, they're known for certain things. I think Belize can be known for energy production. And when you look at one thing that Belize had, yesterday I was walking through Belize City, and one of the things that I realized is that it's so very hot. We have the sun. And we should talk about conversations on getting energy production up and running significantly in Belize. It's something that we've languished with litigation and so forth. And we buy power right now, cheaply produced power, but we still buy power from Mexico. We can produce energy in Belize and we can export energy to Central America. That's actually one that we can do within, I think that this is not as a result of COVID, but that's one of the areas that can be a mainstay of our economy. When we talk about agro-processing, secondary industries to agriculture, we can promote that to a large extent. And I do believe what the Chamber of Commerce was doing is that we import too much things. And I think that we need to shift our economy so that we start to be producers and we balance our trade deficit. So that those are things that we need to focus on relatively quickly while we get the economy started. And one of the things that I would just kind of comment on is that none of these are new ideas. What I think we need is not new ideas, but we need a new framework in leadership. A framework that talks about a vision, a framework that talks about collaboration, a framework that talks about partnership and inclusion, and really getting things done in terms of performance quickly. I think that government believes it's just too bureaucratic and it's too long to do things, and we're very standoffish. we are opposed to ideas. And one of the things that we need to do is that we need to create a funnel so that best ideas rise to the top and be implemented relatively quickly. It's not about the idea, it's about the process and how we make decisions as a country.
And also, Darrell, I also kind of want to address what I, think, and it's something that you mentioned earlier, but it's kind of like the elephant in the room, in that one of the biggest reasons, if not the biggest reason, why a lot of policies have failed, policies have not been implemented, and that we do, and the reason why we do have a lot of the problems in our economy and society is the issue of corruption. And that's something that you mentioned a little bit earlier in passing. But I'd like to know a little bit more about what your thoughts on are on how we can tackle the corruption, which seems to be so pervasive in all areas of our society.
Yeah. So one of the things that I would readily put out there is that I think there's studies on this that look at the amount of GDP that is lost by corruption and wastage, and I think that that's very large. So that if we make government more efficient and if we pass laws, for example, we've talked about things like an unjust investment legislation. I've recently talked about campaign finance reform. You've given opportunity to kind of outline draft legislation about that. So that I think one of the things that we need to focus on quite heavily in this country is leadership. And we need to focus on not only anti-corruption, because when we look at anti-corruption, it's very negative. What we need to focus on is government performance. And I think that when you talk about performance, it subsumes anti-corruption. When you look at the UNPAC, the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, one of the biggest things that's mentioned there is a merit-based public service. It talks a lot about performance. So we do need to focus on ensuring that don't steal money, but we need to really get back to a government that delivers service in the most cost-effective method. I go back to this. A lot of people would invest in Belize. As a lawyer, Gavin, you be familiar with this. A lot of foreign investors come to your law firm and they would want to buy land, they would want to invest in Belize, but it takes too long. And what we need to do at the country is that we need to give a lot of thought and energy into making timelines for the acquisition of government service. When I became a lawyer, a land transfer document used to take us 4 weeks to get. Now sometimes it takes you over a year. We're actually regressing government services. And that's something that we need to focus on quite acutely if we want to move the economy forward. A lot of people believe, but we need to create an enabling environment based on performance where our government functions effectively and efficiently in delivering the services that we want. One of the things also that I think that we need to focus on is that in other countries, they have laws about this where politicians can't give individuals things. And I think that that's very important, so that during an election cycle, you have whatever is going on in relation to grafting or whatever, but there has to be a separation. If people want to access goods and services, they have to access those things from official government channel, public service. A strengthened public service that's dependent on efficiency, that people can access things like housing and grants, business assistance and so forth, so that you do not feel that you are beholden to any politician on those things. I think that that is actually a critical area that I've kind of talked a lot about. But I think the most important issue in getting the economy back on track and getting Belize back on track is addressing this issue of performance and dealing with corruption.
Well, let me be pragmatic for a moment. We are in an election year, and I 100% support. I think any Belizean supports that we get a handle on the corruption that we know exists in this country. And it takes us right back to the start of our conversation in looking at the inequities that we see in our society. But we're in an election year, and we know how things work, and we see things happening right now. Politicians are out giving out food to people. There are allegations being made that some persons have easier access to some of the pantry programs versus others who are supported by other who are of the opposite party. So it's taking place even in a time where people are desperate for help. So talking about being able to shift corruption, let me give you a prime example. When the PSU asked for just a simple a list of employees, who's working, who are the public servants in the country, what are they making, what are their responsibilities. We can't get that list. We haven't gotten any accountability as to how funds are being dispersed, even during COVID-19. The Ministry of Health may read out a list of things every now and again, but when it comes to financial assistance, we still don't know. So if we look forward and imagine that that will be what will continue even as we try our recovery process, it leads to a lot of skepticism, I think, from the wider society.
I think a big problem is the issue of trust and credibility.
Yes.
So that when you are charting a vision, and when you want to move something forward, people have to believe in something. And I think if you're going to ask people, because this is going to be a difficult time for a country, it will require austerity, it will require prudence, it will require thrift, and everyone will not come out unscathed. But I think that if you're going to ask people to make sacrifices, you have to demonstrate that you yourself are willing to make sacrifices and you yourself are willing to do the correct things. And I think that this is something that affects our entire political system. It is something that basically the idea of that there is a lack of trust and credibility in terms of government on a whole. This is not something that is particular to Belize. Yeah. But I think that what we need is a different form of leadership in our country, a form of leadership that is stick and that can work across political lines and that can be transparent. For example, one of the things that people were kind of like commenting on, they used to always tell me that Mr. Mayor used to always be on news. And one of the reasons why that was the case is that a politician should never refuse an interview. A politician should never refuse to submit information. Why? Because we have to be transparent about what we do. I think that there has to be a balance in relation to moving the economy forward, but it has to be the center around how do we get this leadership question in our country? How do we ensure that government is working for people, that it is transparent and accountable, that there are laws in place that ensure that the governmental apparatus moves in a way that's open? And this is one of the things that I'm talking about. It should not be that an individual gets anything from a political office. You shouldn't go to a political office for anything. You should get that from the public servant who is empowered by the political system to distribute goods and services. It should be channeled and properly accounted for, so that to the extent that you have politicians giving out certain things, to the extent that you have politicians providing resources and things like that, that is something that we move away from rather urgently, because it will perpetuate a cycle where people feel that they're dependent on politicians and this idea of corruption being continued in our society. Yeah, so the point is that we need to really strengthen the public service and channel efficient resources through the public service.
Well, you know, and I do agree, but do you then expect that this would be kind of an uphill battle in the sense that the present system sort of favors, or shall I say, it works for a lot of the people who are facilitating this corruption, and, you know, whether or not, you know, whichever party does get in power, because of the weaknesses that are already present in the system, how do we create reform when persons, you know, in powerful positions are going to be benefiting from it, that they're probably going to be opposed? We look, a good example or a good parallel, I could say, is if we look to politics in the US, a lot of conversations have been had, especially in recent times, by, you know, about, you know, creating more social equality, shifting to more socialist policies, at least, you know, in terms of healthcare, education. But we see that in that country, powerful lobbies, people with lots of money, directly prevent policy changes on the governmental level because they have the influence of money. And a lot of people can argue that the same thing can happen or is happening here. So how do we really deal with that on a practical level?
Well, it's really a powerful point that you're making, but the only way that you can deal with that is by empowering the base of society. So that if you notice, a lot of what I focus on in This plan is really talking about education and education reform and ensuring that education is free. One of the countries that I have always been very impressed with is Barbados. And Barbados has had a long policy of free education, and the average Bajan citizen is very empowered, and they act as a check and balance on political power. And Barbados has a smaller population than Belize, and it is about the size of the Stanford district, but they have 8 times our GDP. So that they have been able to march to themselves, and they have a very high human development index. I think that is one of the #1 developing countries in the world in our region and a sister country within CARICOM, so that we can learn a lot from them, particularly on this idea of empowering people through education. And one of the fundamental things that I think affects Belize is that people really do not understand the importance of political process and the importance of a vote. And they allow politicians and they allow political system to diminish the power of the vote. And one of the things that I've read, that I've seen a lot, and I want to really appreciate the media, including Open Your Eyes, for really giving me a space to talk about ideas, because I find these are political systems, not about ideas. It's about people and personalities and politics. So when you talk about should we move towards socialism, or should we provide a safety net for believers, one of the things that I have looked at this one is whether or not we should have a permanent unemployment benefit. For example, you see that right now they're talking about this $75 per week for people who are unemployed. Whether or not there should be some permanent unemployment benefit that straddles beyond it. That's one of the things that I have not really formalized as an idea, but that's something that may be here to assist people. But we don't really talk about ideas like this. The campaign finance reform that came and that went as a conversation. But these are things that Belizeans, union, the Chamber of Commerce, people in civil society, average Belizeans, we need to have conversations about these things on an ongoing basis so that we can hold political leaders accountable. Now is the best time to do that because it's an election year. Because we will focus a lot on political ideas and political activity, now is the best time to have a conversation about what system we need to put in place very quickly in order to ensure that we have change and we have reform in our governmental structure. But it boils down to where the citizen is and that they're empowered through information and education. Yeah. And I think the biggest job of a leader is really communication, is really articulating ideas and a vision so that people believe in that and people can buy onto that. They know why you're doing that. And they can vote for you because they believe in something rather than they believe in $50 or $100.
You know, I think what we've also seen through this pandemic is where our focus has primarily been on investing in money makers. Let me give an example. And you know this in politics. I think we've had this conversation when you were in office, that it is a lot sexier for a politician to build roads than it is to be able to invest in people, because it's a tangible. You see streets, you left, and everybody sees concrete streets, and that's what they remembered. But that was your mandate as a city council. But versus the larger government, you know, investing in unemployment benefits, investing in living wage, or investing in kind of enhancing the safety nets that we have in place, investing in healthcare, which we had to play crazy catch up on in a matter of weeks. Those aren't necessarily the sexy or appealing things that will get you elected. And I go back to the same issue, that's kind of in the status quo in the country. What we do is to get us back in office or to get our friends back in office each term that comes around. And that's where the effort and the priorities go.
Well, I would put this out there, and I mentioned this before on your show. Politicians do what people vote for. And that's something that you have to understand. So that the system exists the way it exists because politicians get votes. So that if we demand different from our politicians, change will happen. I was at City Hall and I recognized the need to make tough choices. But we were able to chart a vision and we won 2 elections by landslides because you communicated with people a different vision, a change. So that what I think needs to happen is that it needs to be twofold. Individual people need to take responsibility for this as well. It's not always take the politician out and beat the politician. Individuals need to recognize the power and significance of their vote. And if we want change, you have to vote for change. You can't want things to happen and expect that people who have been doing things the same way for the last 50 years will miraculously change. If you want change, you have to be the change. And so one of the things that I really talk about heavily is the idea of inclusion and discussion and collaboration. We were able to do this at City Hall, and you can do this at the very top. If you want change, then you have to vote for change. It boils down to individual responsibility. And how can you marshal a vision with everybody to ensure that we address inequalities in this country? We provide education, we provide access to housing, we provide access to land in certain ways that are transparent and equitable. Otherwise, you will always have the system permeate. It actually really would boil down to having people look at a system of empowerment versus dependency. The politician wants the voter dependent. And they will put in.
Let me just say that, because I think I couldn't agree with you more. I think that definitely people need to recognize the power of their vote. But I also think that I cannot, just say that we absolve the politicians of the responsibility here. Let's look at this very realistically. We want an empowered electorate. We all do. But when my lifeline for my child's education or my lifeline for my groceries are attached to my allegiance or my support for a political party, then I have to take care of the basic needs beyond being an empowered voter when I go out to cast my ballot. And so that system is perpetuated by those who hold the authority, by those who make those decisions.
Yeah, and that system is wrong, and that system needs to be changed. So that one of the things that I talk about heavily in the video is restoring the dignity of individuals. That you have to go to a politician's office and wait for something is a shame.
Maybe what we should move away from is saying politicians to our elected officials, because our leaders are there for a purpose. But let me not lose the opportunity. We are in an election year. You have put yourself forward for the leadership convention of the United Democratic Party. Naturally, because we know how the country views politics, people will see this as a part of your campaign. How do you respond to that?
Everything that I do is part of my campaign. Everything that I do, even when I go to court, that's part of my campaign. So that one of the things that people will recognize is that you have to look at leadership in relation to what they have done. Part of the thing that I kind of mentioned in the video is things specifically that we did at City Hall to empower people and to ensure that wealth trickles down to our staff. We raised salaries every year for 6 years at City Council. Never before was that done. We did the land program, we did insurance. When I was putting together that video, counselors and other people were even texting me and said, no, but you did more for staff. And I think that you need to kind of recognize that politics is not a bad word. We actually, when we talk about politics, that when a politician campaigns, that's a bad thing. Nothing is wrong with that. You just have to campaign about ideas, and you have to be about integrity when you're doing it. So when I am putting this video out there, clearly I'm saying that we need change. Clearly I'm saying that I would want to inspire and bring the change. And I'm saying that I could bring together a focal point in relation to articulating a vision and bringing together collaboration and partnership, so that there's nothing wrong with me saying that it is part of a wider vision in the direction that I think the UDP needs to go and the direction that I think the country needs to go.
And looking at what we are currently faced with, or elections should have been slated somewhere around November, maybe before, it can be after. That means that currently, our Prime Minister, who is expected to surrender the leadership of the ruling party, will be taking us through at least this phase of recovery. He's spoken of saying, he's going to borrow until he basically can't borrow anymore to be able to meet public wages. He said publicly that essentially whoever the next leader is going to be will have to face the IMF, because clearly we'll be that much in debt. What are your thoughts on how this should actually pan out? Should we be focusing on perhaps getting whoever the new leader will be to kind of plan and make decisions knowing that they will face the long-term consequences of those financial decisions?
Well, I wouldn't really focus on that. The reality is that I would indicate that whatever the position is, the person who leads this country has to be somebody who is creative, has to be somebody who does not ignore any idea, has to be somebody who is about charting a vision, has to be somebody who can bring people together, has to be somebody who has credibility, has to be somebody who is able to make tough choices, has to be somebody who can represent Belize internationally. And whatever the situation is, that person needs to be able to walk in there and make it work. One of the things that I would say here is that when I inherited City Hall, that City Hall was in a bad shape. It was in a very bad shape. That's the largest municipality in our country. And it was in a bad shape. It was low morale and it was debt-ridden. And we, in the course of 6 years, went in there and we turned that place around so that after 6 years, the majority of Belizeans would have said that Mayor Bradley did a good job. When 6 years before, they wouldn't have said that. So that a leader really is about the situation, the cards that life has dealt with you, and going in there and making that work. And what I'm saying is that whoever is the leader has to be prepared to do that. So if it is tomorrow, if it is next year, if it is in November, if it is wherever, the point is that I am already coalescing a vision and a group of people that I would be able to work with to say that this is what the country needs. And the leadership to step in there whenever that time is, whoever that person is. So that if it comes about, and I would say this readily, if it comes about that that person is a person from the People's United Party, I will support that person because I want to see Belizeans progress. So that one of the things that we need is that we need to be able to see whatever happens. We have a vision, we have a plan, we have leadership that can bring people together, and we have leadership that can step into the office and make whatever is their work for the benefit of everybody.
All right. And with that, we want to say thank you for joining us this morning and discussing your ideas. I think we have definitely welcomed many different schools of thoughts as to what we can and need to be looking at in terms of moving forward. So thank you for sharing your thoughts. All right. And with that, yes? All right, with that, we're going to close off this segment. Of course, we keep on talking about the financial struggle that people have been facing. And the next segment is actually going to be very good for people who are looking for work. BPOs are still open and they are hiring. We'll get an update from the Ready Call Center after the break, so stay tuned.
This COVID update was brought to you by Fulltech Systems, your technology center, where you'll come for the price, but stay for the service.